Chapter 6 The Common Denominators. Albert E.N. Gray gave a speech at the 1940 annual convention of the National Association of Life Underwriters, which is now NAIFA. Gray had more than 30 years of sales management, and home office experience when he gave his speech, The Common Denominator of Success. Gray said he was supervising salespeople without understanding why some were successful and others failed. He began looking for the common denominators of success. Gray determined that the secret of success is that the successful salesperson formed the habit of doing what the failures don't do. Gray's conclusion is just as true as it sounds and as simple as it seems. The things that successful people don't like to do are the very same things you, I, and all other human beings don't like to do. But the successful people have the discipline to do those things. What are the common denominators that made Frank Bettger, W. Clement Stone, Ben Feldman, and Joe Gandolfo so successful? What did they do that the failures didn't do? Common denominator 1, enthusiasm. Bettger, Stone, Feldman, and Gandolfo all understood the importance of enthusiasm in their success. For Bettger, enthusiasm saved his career. For Stone, enthusiasm was the most important factor in selling. For Feldman, enthusiasm was the excitement in the salesperson's voice. He strongly believed that it's not what you say, but how you say it. For Gandolfo, enthusiasm is the key ingredient of a successful person, no matter what business. Bettger mentioned that he had seen individuals with great technical expertise fail because of their lack of enthusiasm, while people with less than half as much technical knowledge succeeded because of their enthusiasm. Think about that. Any listener who has been in a business for more than a few years and has seen salespeople come and go will almost certainly agree with Bettger's statement. Enthusiasm is contagious. It picks up the people around you. Enthusiasm affects your prospects. Do you believe being enthusiastic improves your chances of a sale? If you're a wholesaler, do you believe brokers prefer working with someone who's enthusiastic? I spend a lot of time observing presentations and pay close attention to presenters. I remember once the first presenter at a seminar had great technical material, but was anything but enthusiastic. Everyone in the audience was bored. The next presenter had little substance and was extremely enthusiastic. The audience loved her. Why? Because of her enthusiasm. If the audience had to choose a person to do business with, and these two presenters were the options, which one do you think they would have chosen? Bettger and Stone emphasized the point that feelings follow action. If you want to be enthusiastic, all you have to do is act enthusiastic. Does that sound hokey to you? It may be hokey, but it works. Are you more concerned with hokey or with results? And remember, associate with enthusiastic people. And remember that enthusiasm is contagious. In our high-tech age, very few people talk about the importance of enthusiasm. That's actually great news, because if you understand the importance of enthusiasm, it makes you easier to stand out from all those producers who don't. Common denominator 2, make calls and see people. Technology may change. The way producers prospect may change. The way producers see and meet with people may change. But the fact that you need to make calls hasn't changed. Bettger turned his career around when he listened to the president of Fidelity Mutual, who said, "This business narrows down to one thing, seeing the people." Bettger believed him and sold more business in the following 10 weeks than he had in the previous 10 months. Stone's system was business to business, door to door. Sales reps were expected to make 20 presentations and sell 20 policies a day. That doesn't happen without the sales rep making calls. Feldman said, "There is no easy way. You have to make calls. Nothing happens until you make a call." Gandolfo said, "I can't impress on you enough to see the people. By virtue of seeing people, getting objections, getting no's and yeses, you sharpen your sales skills." Each no gets you closer to a yes, and you learn from the no's. The president of Gandolfo's company understood the reason for Gandolfo's success when he told Gandolfo he had 16 years of experience when he had only been in the business for 8 years. It was because he made twice as many calls as most salespeople. Our business is really simple. It's a numbers game. If you track calls and sales, you know that there are a certain number of calls you need to make a sale. Does that sound easy? What salesperson enjoys keeping any kind of record? Personally, I hate it. Every salesperson I know hates keeping records. But remember, the successes do the things the failures don't, like keeping track of calls and keeping track of sales. There are some programs today that make it much easier to track calls. It still requires discipline to do it. But once you start, it grows into a habit and it becomes easy. Betcher found that it was actually liberating to track calls, interviews, and commissions. He knew exactly what each call was worth. Did that help him make more calls? Definitely. Because he knew that every time he made a call, he was earning X amount. If you knew that every time you made a call, it was worth $250, that would be great motivation to make an extra call. There's a little poem that I learned early in my career. What's behind the door, I cannot tell, but this I know and know it well. The more I open, the more I sell. It's been over 100 years since Betcher heard the insurance business narrows down to one thing, seeing the people. The principle is still the same. It hasn't changed over the past 100 years. If you want to succeed, you have to make calls. Common denominator 3, planning and study. Both planning and study are so important that I want to look at each separately. First, let's consider planning. Early in my career, someone told me the secret to success in our business is simple. Plan your work and work your plan. That sounds so simple and so easy. And that's exactly what Betcher, Stone, Feldman, and Gandolfo did throughout their careers. Betcher set aside Saturday mornings to plan his next week. He knew exactly who he was going to call and what he was going to say. He could then relax the remainder of the weekend, and as a result, he was ready on Monday morning and made calls with confidence. He also spent 30 minutes planning his calls each morning. Stone believed that one of the most important habits the salesperson can develop happens at the end of each day, planning the following day's activities. He did his planning at home in the evening, away from the distractions of the office. Stone taught the importance of planning to his executive team. Feldman would spend 2 or 3 hours in the evening studying planning. He stated his objective in planning was to schedule what he knew he should do and avoid doing what he shouldn't do. He would plan his calls for the following day, and for many of his calls, he reviewed Dun & Bradstreet reports. He knew financial information about the business before he called on the business. Gandolfo not only planned his calls, but he used visualization techniques prior to making the calls. He would see himself walking into the office, making the presentation, answering objections, and closing the sale. My guess is all 4 of these greats used visualization in some form. I remember listening to a recording of Napoleon Hill talking about teaching visualization to Stone's managers and sales reps. Planning requires discipline and commitment. I get a lot more done when I plan my day the night before. If you really want to see a difference, just take 30 minutes on a Sunday and plan for Monday. Does it make a difference? Yes. The salesperson who plans is prepared mentally and your productivity increases. Now, let's consider study. There's only one way to grow personally and professionally, and that's by setting aside specific time to study. Betcher spent 30 minutes each morning studying. For Stone, his planning and study time was in the evening. Gandolfo spent 20 hours a week studying, and he always had study material with him. One of the best times to study and learn is while you're driving. I can still remember listening to Stone, Feldman, and Gandolfo on cassette tape with a cassette recorder plugged into my car's lighter. Believe it or not, that was considered high tech at the time. And it's so much easier today with CDs and MP3s. And there is tremendous material that you can access. I still listen while I'm driving. Right now, I'm listening to Brian Tracy on self-discipline. Part of the reason Stone, Feldman, and Gandolfo are such a strong part of my thinking is that I've listened to them so many times. When you listen only once, you miss ideas. Learning is all about repetition. And when you listen frequently, the ideas become part of you. Repetition is so important in self-improvement. Think about this. You listen to a song once. You may remember some of the words. You listen 5 times, and you can remember the words with music in the background. You listen 10 times. You can sing the song without the music. Salespeople will complain about repetition, but repetition leads to mastery. I want to add a thought about preparation, and I have a question for you. Have you ever really practiced your presentation? Betcher's sales increased when an agent moved into his area from Georgia. The agent suggested that they practice their presentations on one another. Both improved their presentation and sales as a result. Stone's sales reps practiced their presentations on each other. When Ben Feldman was developing a new package, he would test and practice on his wife, kids, and office staff. If you want to improve your results, find someone who will give you honest feedback on your presentation. Observe the presentations of others and continuously look for ideas to improve your presentation. I want to close this section with a quote from Larry Wilson. Wilson did a lot of training in the life insurance business. He defined insurance professionals as having 3 qualities. They're good and they know it. They keep getting better, and they critique their own performance. Common denominator 4, focus on one product or market. All 4 sales grades we've been discussing were focused on specific markets or specific product. As his career evolved, Betcher focused almost exclusively on the business market. Stone focused on the sale of one kind of policy, a pre-issue accident plan. Later, as his company introduced new plans, the company developed new sales teams to sell specific plans. Stone believed that the secret to his and his salespeople's success was their efforts were concentrated on the sale of one policy. Feldman focused on the owners of close, privately held corporations. He sold packages, and his packages were bundles of whole life designed to solve a specific problem. Gandolfo focused on specific occupations, like ministers, funeral home directors, and pharmacists. Before moving to tax and estate planning, he focused exclusively on working with automobile dealers around the U.S. I was thinking about Gandolfo's comment about starting sales after going through his initial training. He could only sell $5,000 and $10,000 of life paid up at age 65. He said this kept it simple and kept him from getting confused. Gandolfo advised, find one area and become an expert in that area, and your confidence will grow. Years ago, the company I was working with did business with an organization, National Teacher Associates, or NTA. The president of NTA learned the business from Stone at Combine. NTA focused on selling cancer plans to teachers, one product, one market. I had the privilege of attending NTA's new agent training class. The training was based on Stone's success principles. The class was 5.5 days long, and when the agent left the class, the agent was an expert in the sale of cancer insurance. The agent knew the words to open a discussion, present the product, and answer objections, and then close the sale. Each agent had written out the presentation and practiced the presentation. There was no confusion, and the sales rep was confident as a result. One thing I remember from my early days in the business is that there were a number of small companies that had better agent retention rates than some of the larger companies. The larger companies had more extensive training and much better financing. The difference was that the smaller companies focused on one product. It makes me think about Franklin Life. Franklin Life's ads and industry publications focused on agents who had failed with other life insurance companies and then succeeded with Franklin Life. The ads actually showed the agent's income before and after joining Franklin Life. Why were those agents successful with Franklin Life after failing with another company? With Franklin Life, they focused on one plan, the President's Plan, and they were experts on that plan. When you focus on one product or one market, you become an expert, and as a result, your confidence grows. While I was writing this section, I kept thinking about Bum Phillips when he coached the Houston Oilers. The reporters were on him because the Oilers didn't have as many play variations as some other teams. His response was, "It's difficult to be aggressive when you're confused." I was also thinking about my friend Irwin Cohen. Irwin's presented at the MDRT meetings several times, and he's one of the leaders in the U.S. in disability insurance sales. In his presentation, Irwin shares his struggles in the business until he focused. Today, he is focused on one product in one market, disability insurance to attorneys. One of the reasons for Irwin's success is his focus. One time, talking with Ben Feldman's son, Marvin, who is a great salesperson himself, I asked Marvin what advice he had for agents, especially new agents. Marvin said that after you've learned the basics, you should pick a market and specialize in it. Marvin said the producer should form alliances with agents who are experts in other products and other markets. Marvin has focused on estate planning and business continuation. He doesn't do group insurance, health insurance, long-term care, or disability insurance. He formed alliances with experts in those areas. Common denominator 5. Sell yourself. Make the most important sale first. How can you sell something that you don't believe in enough to buy it on yourself? How can you overcome the objection, "I can't afford it," if you feel exactly the same way? Betcher owned a $1,000 policy on himself. Then he purchased a $25,000 policy. The next year, he jumped in the company standings from 92nd to 13th. He no longer feared the objection, "I can't afford it." Feldman said you have to buy it first. If you don't buy it, you will never sell it. When Feldman was on the debit, he owned a $500 policy, and he sold $500 policies. As he increased his personal life insurance, he sold larger policies. Gandolfo said that if life insurance is good for the prospect, then it's good for you too. You can't do anything effectively until you believe in it. Gandolfo began to reach his goals when he began to own large amounts of life insurance. When you believe in life insurance enough to buy significant amounts on yourself, it comes through in every presentation. Prospects are influenced by your belief. The concept is so simple, yet so hard. My question for you, do you believe in what you're doing and what you're selling enough to buy it on yourself? Common denominator 6, questions. Questions were an important part of Betcher, Stone, Feldman, and Gandolfo's presentations. They all use questions effectively. Several years ago, I was doing a training presentation in Chicago, and someone asked me where I learned how to sell. And I said, I learned from Socrates. And then I said, I may be old, but I'm not old enough to know him personally. Socrates' approach was, rather than argue, use questions to change the other person's thinking. Now, my question for you is, what does a good attorney and a good salesperson have in common? The answer is, they only ask questions when they know how the witness or the prospect will answer. Every trial lawyer and salesperson can thank Socrates. Another question for you. People hate to be sold, but they love to buy. What's the secret? The answer is questions. Betcher and Stone were believers in the Socratic approach. And as an illustration, I'm going to share 4 questions used in presenting critical illness protection. Question 1. Who do you know who's been diagnosed with cancer, had a heart attack, or stroke? Everyone knows someone who has suffered one of those conditions, and they automatically think of the person closest to them. And as a result, they're emotionally involved in the sales process. Question number 2. Was it expected? And the answer is always no. No one expects to have one of those conditions. And this question demonstrates the randomness of a critical illness. Question number 3. Was there unplanned financial or emotional stress on the family or the business? The answer is yes. 99.9% of the time, there is financial stress, but 100% of the time, there is emotional stress. And then the fourth question is, would cash have helped? The answer is yes. And here's the interesting thing. Asking that question, most prospects will tell you exactly how the person they're thinking of would have used the money. And by doing so, they will have given you a reason they themselves will buy. These 4 questions demonstrate the need for critical illness insurance and are a great example of using the Socratic approach. Remember, people buy because of emotion and then look for logic to justify their decision. I had a friend who was trying to close a life insurance case to fund a buy-sell agreement. The 2 partners just kept putting him off, even though he gave every logical reason for them to buy and buy immediately. He was finally able to close the sale. He asked one of the partners these 2 questions. First question, how would you like to be in business with your partner's widow? And then the follow-up question was, if your partner died, how would you talk with his widow about setting a price on her interest in the business? There's another thing about good questions. If you're making statements, the customer is thinking either about you or the product you're selling. If you're asking questions, the prospect is thinking about himself or herself, and answering those questions, the prospect gets involved and stays involved. Betcher was able to sell a New York manufacturer because of his questions. With questions, he was able to determine the manufacturer's major concern. Remember, the manufacturer already had 10 proposals. Why did Betcher get the sale? His questions helped the manufacturer identify his concerns, and every one of the other 10 was just selling product. Gandolfo's presentation was based on a series of open-ended questions to determine the prospect's needs and philosophy of life insurance. If you ask good open-ended questions, the prospect will tell you what they want and the reasons they will buy, but you have to listen to the prospect's answers. Ben Feldman was the master of disturbing questions. His questions were designed to help the prospect see that the prospect had a problem. Think about Feldman's questions. How much is your life worth? People never die at the right time. What makes you think it'll be different for you? How would your family get money out of your business if you didn't come back tomorrow? How do you become effective using questions in selling? You start asking questions. That's the only way to do it. Take some of the questions in this book and start using them. Common denominator 7. Stop selling insurance and start selling what it does. It's not about the product. It's about what the product does. Remember our discussion about the drill? No one wants to buy a drill. They had a problem. They needed a haul. And the only reason they bought the drill was to solve their problem. Likewise, no one wants to buy insurance. Instead, they're worried about how can they buy groceries, pay their mortgage if they're sick or hurt and can't work. They have a problem. Income protection solves that problem. If you only remember one thing from this audio book, it's that we don't sell products, we solve problems. The product is simply the way we solve the problem. Ben Feldman is considered to be the greatest life insurance salesman ever. He didn't sell life insurance. His packages were all about solving a specific problem. Whole life happened to be the solution to that problem. Gandolfo and Betcher designed their questions to identify the prospect's problem. When you look at what we do as solving problems, it totally changes your attitude. Years ago, a friend of mine had a client who was an auditor. The auditor mentioned that he needed to earn additional income. This auditor was such an introvert, he couldn't lead a group in silent prayer. My friend asked the auditor his thoughts on mutual funds. The auditor said, after life insurance needs are met and the person has an emergency fund, mutual funds are all right. You're betting on the U.S. economy, which is a good bet. My friend said his company was putting on some part-time people. Would the auditor be interested? The auditor said, I couldn't sell. My friend said, forget sell. Could you show people how to balance their budgets? If they need life insurance, could you suggest they buy more life insurance? And if there's any left over, could you suggest they put it into a mutual fund? The idea of selling was unacceptable to the auditor, but he could help others solve their financial problems. That happened many, many years ago, but the last I heard, the auditor was making more money part-time solving problems with life insurance and mutual funds than he was as an auditor. One of the most powerful ways to drive home what insurance does are stories. Becher used stories to demonstrate what life insurance does. Early in my career, I met a salesman who used Elba Communicator. Now, the Elba Communicator was a briefcase with a screen, and it had a cassette recorder with film strips. There were a variety of specific presentations for retirement, family needs, spouse insurance, and income protection. The presentations were real-life stories. There is nothing more powerful than a real-life story about what insurance does. The agent had a high closing rate. All he did was show the film that related to the prospect's problems. The film showed how the insurance would solve a problem for the prospect. The Life Insurance Foundation for Education has some great stories and videos that can be used for this very purpose. I would suggest you go to the Life website. It's www.lifehappens.org. Becher stated in one of his books, the greatest salesperson ever used stories, only they called them parables. Now, I want you to think about for a minute what happens when you focus on product. Usually you bore the prospect. Have you ever seen a prospect's eyes start to glaze over? When you focus on product, the prospect focuses on the product. The prospect will ask questions related to the product, and in most cases will not buy. I remember a survey years ago about non-purchasers of disability income. These were individuals to whom an agent presented disability insurance and then the prospect didn't buy. One of the main reasons they didn't buy was the agent focused on the product, and the prospect became confused. My friend Keith Leach and I were discussing this issue of agents and advisors focused on product. Keith is one of the premier sales experts on critical illness and income protection in Canada. He told me about a recent meeting where 4 advisors came up to him to ask questions. 3 of the 4 were asking product questions, and it was obvious the 3 understood the product more than the 4th. The 3 hadn't been able to sell any critical illness, and the 4th was hitting it out of the park with sales. The reason is simple. The 3 were selling product, and the 4th was selling what the product does. In closing, early in my career, I was fortunate enough to meet Jack Wardlaw. Jack was the top salesperson with Philadelphia Life. He was a sales master. He wrote a book, Top Secrets of Selling, Thought Plus Action. I read the book many, many years ago. The book was written in the 60s with a revision in the 80s, and it's been out of print, but I was able to find a copy. Jack said, I have come to the conclusion that basic sales principles will remain unblemished from the time Grant Taggart sold his first policy till long after Ben Feldman sells his last. You can take a good salesman from any period. If they're vested with the principles of good salesmanship and a knowledge of current products, they would be successful today. Grant Taggart sold his first policy in 1914, riding to the appointment on horseback. Jack wrote that over 40 years ago. The reason for Jack's great success, he understood principles. And the only thing I would add to Jack's thoughts today would be competent with the tools of technology. It's time to focus on sales and sales principles. They are more important than ever. I love the way Frank Becher closes How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. Becher writes, and I completely agree, you can do one of 3 things after listening to this book. First, you can do nothing. If you do nothing, this book has been a waste of time. Second, you can say to yourself, there are a lot of good ideas in this book. I'll try all of them. I'll give it a shot. If you take either of those approaches, nothing will change. In fact, I'll guarantee that nothing will change. I know that from personal experience. Third, you can say to yourself, I'll pick 4 key concepts that I believe will have the greatest impact on me and my business, and I will commit to making them part of me. I would strongly support that kind of approach. Commit to implementing one idea for 2 weeks, then move on to number 2, and so on. I'd love to hear from you. My email is ken@kensmithsales.com, and I wish you all the best, and thank you.